In Conversation. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of In Conversation. I'm pleased to be here with Ambassador Nirupama Rao. Ambassador Rao was the Indian ambassador to China, the United States, Bolivia and Peru, the Foreign Secretary of India, and she's
High Commissioner to Sri Lanka.
Exactly, High Commissioner to Sri Lanka. And she is one of India's most distinguished and respected diplomats and foreign service officers. Ambassador Rao, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Abhinav.
So let's go back to your early years. You were born in Kerala, but completed your schooling in various cities as a result of your father's position as a lieutenant colonel in the Indian Army. So what inspired you to first go into foreign service, international relations, and diplomacy?
Well, I was always interested in current affairs and history from the time I was a little girl. And a lot of that was because my father inculcated in me that interest. He always followed international affairs and domestic affairs within India with a great deal of interest. He would listen to the radio news, he would read the newspapers, and he would ask me to do the same. And as a little girl, I was quite drawn to it. I was interested. It was not as if I was being forced to do it. I just had a natural inclination to seek answers to questions I asked myself about the past of India, the historical heritage of India. At the age of 7, I remember my parents, because of my deep interest, taking me on a tour of Delhi and Agra just to show me the Mughal monuments. We lived in Lucknow, which is also a very historic city. So all that, I think, awoke in me this great curiosity about the world around me, beyond what I was just seeing in the here and now. And that, I think, led me to developing this great interest in becoming a diplomat and being able to represent India in the rest of the world.
Were there any underlying apprehensions as you entered this relatively new field, which was still in its nascent stages?
I don't believe as a child or as a young individual you are kind of held back by hesitations. I think that's the wonderful innocence of childhood and youth, as it were. You feel the world is at your feet, that you can hold it in the palm of your hand. And I don't believe that is, being overreaching. It's just that you have dreams and you believe you can fulfill them.
Definitely. And what was your most challenging diplomatic feat throughout your career, and perhaps one that you're most proud of?
Well, there were a number of situations one was placed in. I had a very challenging career in some ways. I had difficult assignments that women had not been assigned to before in many ways. And I remember the first such experience was when I was a young diplomat in Sri Lanka in the early 80s. And if you remember, in July of 1983, the entire island, it's an island country, was taken over by riots between the two major communities, the Sinhalese and the Tamil communities. And there was a lot of violence, a lot of destruction, a lot of targeting of minorities. And that, being witness to that, and dealing with the aftermath of that, because India is in many ways Sri Lanka's only neighbor, if you look at the geography of our region. It's just a small stretch of water that separates India from Sri Lanka. And in the old days, obviously, there was a land bridge that connected the two countries. And ethnically, linguistically, from the point of view of religion, we're very connected. So in many ways, that zone of separation, even if it's a few miles of sea between us, doesn't really break that link. So when you had the riots there, India was very concerned about it, and a lot of the Tamils who were affected by the riots wanted to come away to India. And my task was essentially to position myself in the big refugee camps that had come up as a result of the riots in Colombo and other places, and to deal with people, deal with their grief, deal with their need to go to India, to seek refuge in India. And that was a very defining experience in many ways. And then later on in other postings that I did, I began to deal with public affairs, public diplomacy, and media. And ultimately I became the first woman to be Foreign Office spokesperson. And we haven't had a woman since then, but I dearly hope we will have more women to speak for the Foreign Office. And I did that, and I was in difficult situations like the Agra summit between India and Pakistan. And I came into that office when 24/7 TV had arrived in India. And we had numerous TV channels who were in real time following many of the events concerning foreign policy. This was the time of 9/11 also, and I had the opportunity to travel to a number of world capitals after 9/11, including Washington. I remember going to New York just a few weeks after 9/11 and meeting the authorities there with my foreign minister who was leading the delegation, and just hearing the graphic accounts of people who had been affected by that. So in many ways, just having this ringside view of history is what makes the life of a Foreign Service officer so exciting and so special. So that was another very interesting assignment, and I began to go live on television. One didn't shirk, one didn't have hesitation about facing cameras and answering questions live on television, which was the convention for many other foreign offices, but which we hadn't followed. But subsequent to my taking that up as a practice, it became the convention in our foreign office too, and we would transcribe interviews, put them on the website. So I believe I was able to introduce more of a sense, excuse me, of transparency and openness into the functioning of the Foreign Office. And then, of course, I was the first woman ambassador to China, and having dealt with China very closely through many, many phases of my career, that was a wonderful opportunity to be able to study the intractable issues that divide us at this moment, that have defied solution, but at the same time to be able to contribute to the building of some common ground, whether it's in confidence building or the reduction of tensions or establishing mechanisms for dialogue and building a relationship that is much more well-rounded than it used to be before. And the pinnacle, of course, was being the Foreign Secretary and the head of the Indian Foreign Service and dealing with a whole spectrum of complex issues. And to be there not only as a professional, but also as a woman, representing Indian womanhood in some ways, and trying my best to be an inspiration to younger women in my country.
So you just mentioned, as a diplomat of such stature, you have to deal with so many different complex issues wherever you may be. So in all your travels, is there anything that helps establish an instant connection between the countries involved?
Yes, I remember after the tsunami in Sri Lanka, we had the dreadful Indian Ocean tsunami on Boxing Day in 2004, the 26th of December. And I remember being in Sri Lanka as the High Commissioner and witnessing the devastation, the deaths, families torn apart, missing persons. A lot of Indians who were holidaying in Sri Lanka were affected, and it was so poignant to just witness at first hand little children who had lost their parents, the parents had been swept away by this tidal wave, and connecting them with their families, their relatives back in India, trying to restore some kind of order and stability, delivering aid from India, traveling to areas in the north and east of the island that had been cut off, not just because of the tsunami, but because of the civil war. There was a civil war raging in Sri Lanka at that time. and areas in the north and east were, the theater of war, as it were, and they had been off bounds to foreigners. But because of the tsunami and because of the need to deliver aid and rehabilitation, I was able to get the permission to visit those areas from the Sri Lankan government. And that itself was such a great revelation for me, to be able to talk to the Tamil communities in these areas and to listen to the tales they had to tell of being in a war situation for so many years, seeing the destruction all around me, and really hoping that peace and reconciliation could return to the island.
Right, and so your time as High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, I believe, also coincided with the time President Rajapaksa was elected, right?
That's right.
Okay. So I want to transition very quickly to the U.S. Many Indians in the U.S. have expressed a desire to hold both an Indian passport and an American passport. So, do you think there is any sort of possibility of a dual citizenship between India and the U.S. sometime in the near future?
Well, as far as I am aware, to the best of my knowledge, that is not on the horizon. But the government of India has introduced the Overseas Citizen of India classification, as it were, which works in many ways like dual citizenship does. What the OCI card or the status enables you to have is visa-free access to India. It's kind of a lifetime visa, and you can come here as many times as you want to visit relatives, to set up homes here, and to be able to interact very normally with the rest of the population in India. You can't hold political office, of course, and you cannot hold a government job because you have a foreign nationality. But barring all that, and of course owning agricultural land and things, you can do as much as a citizen of India can. And most importantly, you're able to contribute to the development of this country, invest in the economy, and to help build a new India. And I believe for every person of Indian origin living abroad or a member of the diaspora, that is their dream, isn't it?
Absolutely. And for our youth viewers, if there is any one piece of advice that you would give to an aspiring foreign service officer or diplomat, especially in India, what would that be?
Well, I would say first and foremost that it's a wonderful career to aspire to and to be in. It requires professionalism of the highest stage. It requires you to believe in yourself, to be bold, not to be risk averse, because you have to try and to be innovative, creative, in order to expand your reach and the impact that you make on audiences everywhere. So I believe that my advice to young people everywhere, and particularly to young women, is that dare to dream and dare to fulfill your dreams, and forget hesitation. That should not be in your vocabulary.
Wonderful. And you are a literary connoisseur and an avid listener of opera and Indian classical music. So post-retirement from the Foreign Service, do you find time to fall back on any of these passions and interests of yours?
I do a lot of writing, of course, which I love. I love writing, and I'm working on a book on India and China, and I've tentatively titled it Tell It on the Mountain, India and China, 1949 to 1962. So it covers the very crucial period of the relationship before we had the brief conflict of 1962. And it's a very defining period in the relationship. It impacts much of what we do today. So my aim and my desire is to inform audiences in my country, in India, and beyond, about what the perspectives that a former diplomat like me can bring to the understanding of this very complex issue. And yes, I have a passion for music. I've always had that since I was a little girl and listened to the radio. I had the reputation in my family of both listening to music and studying at the same time. So it was a kind of ambidextrousness, I think, that helped me as a diplomat also. And I believe music transcends barriers. It speaks a universal language. And so I'm a vocalist, I perform, and the unique concept that I've tried to develop is to build this group of musicians, of Sri Lankans and myself, and we perform together, and we call our concerts Beyond Borders. And I think it's an example of what we can do through music: build friendships, build empathy, learn to listen to each other, and to understand that the creation of such harmony can really help relieve tensions also. And that has led me, in fact, to set up with my husband the South Asian Symphony Foundation here in India, inspired very much by the example of the West Eastern Divan Orchestra that was established by Professor Edward Said of Columbia, and Daniel Barenboim, the Argentinian-born, world-renowned conductor. And that example of the Divan Orchestra has, in many ways, fueled my dream to set up a South Asian Symphony Orchestra drawn from all the 8 countries in our region: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, the 8 countries. And we're building that orchestra, and it's been a wonderful voyage of discovery for me to discover talent and to be able to tap into it and consolidate a 60-member philharmonic orchestra. Also drawn, let me say, from members of the diaspora, the South Asian diaspora. So we have really looked beyond the borders of this region, and we are preparing for a big concert at the National Center for the Performing Arts in Mumbai on April 26th this year. So that's really what my calendar looks like. And I've been teaching in retirement at Brown University and at Columbia, where I was there most recently, and you took my class, where I was George Ball Professor in International Relations.
So Ambassador Rao is Ambassador Rao and Professor Rao as well for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time in your class as well. So I know the South Asia Symphony Foundation has been very close to you and your husband as well. So I encourage all our viewers and audiences to please check out their website. If you're in India, near Mumbai, around the time of the concert date, please do attend the concert. It would definitely mean a lot to Ambassador Rao as well. So with that, thank you so much once again for sharing your experiences with our audience, and it's been a real pleasure speaking with you today, Ambassador Rao.
Thank you, Abhinav. Wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, once again. Here along with Ambassador Nirupama Rao, we have Mr. Sudhakar Rao, who is Ambassador Rao's husband. He served in the IAS for many years, and he was the Chief Secretary of Karnataka as well. So thank you so much for being here, Mr. Rao. And so if you could just share with us, viewers in the audience, some of your most memorable experiences in the IAS, advice you may have for aspiring, again, foreign service IAS officers, and perhaps even advice for men whose wives have very busy careers, and we all know what a career Ambassador Rao has had. So if you could just share with us some of your experiences and advice, we would really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on your program. Yeah, I joined the Indian Administrative Service. In fact, Nirupama and I were batchmates, as she may have told you, in 1973. So that's a long time ago. And I was in the IAS for almost 37 years. Actually, it's a fascinating career because I don't think the kind of variety that the job offers, the kind of challenges that it offers, is replicated in any other assignment, literally. Because, which of course many consider it as the bane of Indian administration too. because you sort of move from sector to sector, you move from geographic locations to another. But, literally, if variety is the spice of life, then IAS is a service for you. And like all other IAS officers, or most other IAS officers, I too have had a sort of very varied career. But if you were to ask the highlights, any IAS officer will tell you that the highlight of his 30-odd years of service would be being a district magistrate. When you are, for a couple of years at least, in many states for more years, the all-in-all, the my bap or the go-to person in the district. And I had actually gone to a district called Shimoga in Karnataka, now of course rechristened as Shivamogga. And I was there with the following period of rather, turbulent ridden previous years, because the farmers' agitation was at its peak then. So we had a very, very awkward situation where there would be boards put up by the agitating farmers that revenue department people, the IAS officer in the district typically belongs to the revenue department, the department that looks after land matters. You had boards all over in the villages, revenue officials not allowed and that kind of thing. So I was there for 2 years. It was an extraordinary challenge in the sense that you had to build bridges with the agitating farmers, convince them that people who are in the government are not necessarily evil. So much so that I think the high point of my career was when I had to make a sudden departure from the district because I was selected as a Mason Fellow to do a Master of Public Administration program at Harvard. The farmer leaders actually came to me and requested me for time, saying that we would love to spend some time with you and have a farewell tea for you, which I think was an enormous, achievement in a manner of speaking for those days. The second highlight, I suppose, would be the 2 years that I spent in the Prime Minister's office with Rajiv Gandhi. So the Prime Minister's office at that point of time had sort of, rightly or wrongly, and I hope it wasn't a bad precedent, sort of taken on a lot of responsibilities. It was literally the government, the central government, the federal government was being run literally out of the Prime Minister's office. Now, whether that was a good thing or not is another issue for political philosophers to decide. But as a result, for those who were there in that office, there were some momentous years because you had so much to do. You had such an enormous scope to introduce new ideas, new policies, be a platform for a great deal of changes happening in the government. And Rajiv Gandhi, whatever people may say, was a very forward-looking man and very, very anxious to bring in changes into the Indian system at that time. So I think I would list out these two as sort of singularly exciting periods in my 35, 36 years. And of course, Chief Secretary's assignment is an unparalleled assignment. You are responsible for the entire state, all departments of the government, all services, be they police officers, forest officers, they all come under your supervision, and you are the sort of parenti local for all of them. So that, of course, is literally the highlight of my career, I guess.
For sure. Yeah.
Advice, I think it's a great field to go into. IAS has, in many ways, unfortunately, ceased to be the wonderful service it was. These are inevitable changes of time as power passes from one vertical in the government to another, and so maybe this isn't the place to discuss that. But notwithstanding those changes, I think it's still one of the greatest jobs that a youngster can aspire for himself or herself, because you are still at the cutting edge of change in, over the years. The second thing that has happened is the private sector or the non-governmental sector has become so much more important in India. When we were in the government, it was every change in the Indian society, if I may, I'm not trying to be exaggerate that role, but a lot of responsibility for change came to the bureaucracy. Today it isn't so. So in that sense, inevitably, the bureaucracy is not as important as it was earlier, but it still has an enormous role to play, particularly as far as disadvantaged sections go, as far as rural areas go, where the modern economy or the economic services haven't reached. So I would still think that it's a great assignment, and notwithstanding what youngsters hear about what's going on in the government and political interference and not being allowed to do what you think is right, I think it's still something that youngsters should look at very seriously. Public life in general, and the Indian civil service in particular.
Got it. And your experiences as a husband with a wife who's always sort of positioned in different countries, your advice to other husbands who may be in similar situations or who may...
It really is not an advice that can be generalized and made applicable to everyone. But I did take when we got married, I knew very well what I was getting into. So the fact that we weren't going to be working together or going to be posted together in the same place was not something that I didn't know about or came as a surprise. So to that extent, I have never sort of thought that this is a problem that should be addressed seriously, or one of us has to make a sacrifice and be with the other, because we went into it knowingly. So my advice to those who are in similar situations is to sort of allow the other person to whatever he or she in this applies to the wife too, to allow the person to bloom and blossom as a professional, whether it's not necessarily IAS and IFS, but it could be any career. But having decided to go together, I don't think that should be something that becomes a stumbling block or something that impacts your relationship. So we tried to make the best of it, though. Wherever possible, whenever possible, we worked together, and that's why we were in Delhi for the longest of periods, whereas typically the foreign service officer is abroad and the IAS officer is in the state governments. But we tried to do our postings together in Delhi, where alone we could have been posted. But otherwise, you just have to realize that the partner too has a life of his or her own, and you must give space.
Definitely. And with that, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Rao. I'm sure our viewers, especially youth, husbands and wives, are all very appreciative of your insights.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you once again, Ambassador Rao.
And a very happy 2019 to you and all your viewers too.
Thank you very much.
Happy New
To you
Year
as
to you
well.
all.